Fire swords, a staple of pop culture, one of the most iconic fantasy weapons. But are they actually practical in the real world? Well, in today's episode, as you can see, I have one, and I wanted to put it to the test. I wanted to see how much does this flame actually add to the lethality of like a sword. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Screen Tested. I am your host Tyrant, where we take things from movies, TV shows, pop culture, try to create them in the real world and test them one-to-one from the media that they come from. Now in today's episode we are going to be taking a look at a very, very popular pop culture item, and that is a fire sword. Everybody loves swords, everybody loves fire. Smash them together, what do you get? Well, you get some magic. Literally. Anyways, yes, we're going to be taking a look at fire swords today. Are they practical? Are they useful? How well do they perform? And does the fire actually add anything? Because you see, a sword is actually a very well honed and very well tested weapon from history. There's a reason why swords are the way they are. It's because they're very effective at what they do. So why would you need the fire? Anyway, the fire adds a undeniable factor of absolute coolness to it. So I'm not going to debate that point, but I will debate the practicality of it, and I do want to find out how useful, how much does the fire and the heat of the blade actually add to the deadliness of a sword, really. So we've got some testing to do, but before we get to that, I just wanted to say thank you to Nate. He's actually the one who gave me his fire sword for today's episode. It's the one we used in the last episode I did of fire swords. So I just want to say thank you to him, because without him I wouldn't have been able to do today's episode. So let's get to it. So a fire sword in real life isn't actually that good of an idea. You see, when you actually create a sword, there are different processes that involve heating the blade. For example, you have your heat treating and your tempering. And both of these processes impart onto the blade different properties that you want. For example, if you wanted like a spring steel blade or a differentially hardened blade. Now, what do you think happens when you have something like a fire sword and you're heating that blade up again for long periods of time? It can ruin the temper or the heat treating, which can turn your spring steel blade into just a piece of annealed steel, which is not very hard or very good for the purposes of a sword. So having a fire sword is cool in theory, but when you actually try and create one in real life with a real blade, it'll ruin the blade most likely. Yeah. So this here isn't actually an edge. This is not sharp, this cannot cut you. It is just a bevel. Now the reason why it doesn't have an edge on it is very simple, because if it had an edge it would just be a normal sword and it would cut like a normal sword. So what we're going to do is we'll see how much the heat actually helps and see if it can make some clean cuts with just a bevel. Let's get started. Just a bit of a disclaimer. Today has been pouring with rain. It is wet everywhere. We are in the middle of winter. As you can see by my hair, like I've been in the rain all day. So today's episode is perfectly safe. Nothing's gonna be catching on fire that shouldn't. I don't know how it looks on camera, but we're in the middle of winter. The rain is there. We have storm clouds above us. That's why we're doing it today. So hopefully it's as safe as possible when it comes to a fire sword. Let's get to it. So in today's episode, I have a very special guest. Nate is joining me once again, and there's some really good reasons for this.
Yeah, because he's got my fire sword.
I'm pretty sure I mentioned this earlier in the start of the episode. Anyways, he's going to be helping me out today because I actually do want him here to give his thoughts as well. And there's some stuff that we can kind of revisit a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, this fire sword design here was kind of yours.
Yes, it was a quick mock-up because we kind of wanted something for a shot. So it was a very quick mock-up of how we can do things, but it works.
Yes.
And it's functional to reset pretty quickly.
So I thought we could do a couple of different stages. First up, we'll light this on fire and we'll do some backwards and forwards, just like a little bit of, not sparring, free-form fighting. And the reason why is because we don't want to put Nate in danger. I don't want to be in danger, but we want to simulate how it would be to actually fight against
that makes sense.
a fire sword.
Because it is like, with sword fighting, you're not fighting the sword, you're actually fighting the person.
Yes.
You're trying to see their movements, you're trying to basically counter what's happening.
Yes.
If you've got a giant ball of flame in front of your eyes, it's probably going to distract you from that.
So we'll start off with that, then we'll move on to some cutting practice. We'll see if we can actually cut through some stuff with this.
With the giant piece of rope.
I wouldn't touch it, it's probably still hot.
It's still hot.
Then we will end up on a flesh analog, and the reason why I want to finish out on that is because... Not you.
Good.
Not sadly.
Good.
The reason why I want to end up on a flesh analog is because, like I said, I want to see if this bevel does anything. I want to see if that actually just is, if the heat is enough to make this just cut through things. So why don't we get started? This one's going to be a little bit finicky because we've got to get the sword lit and on fire every single take.
Yeah, so, you know, a 10-minute video is probably going to take us a couple of hours, so
let's do it. So I'm trying to get the fire to present it to you. I couldn't see my range.
Okay. So there is some stuff in some of the, and don't get me wrong, I'm not an expert swordsman, but I've seen a lot of people who do things like this, where they get a nice little quick wind, and they have to know exactly where their point is to be able to, like, basically twist on a bind.
Right.
So you can't do that if you can't see where your bind is. You could feel where it is.
Because we're trying to be safe here, I need to know where the blade is, and especially with this one. And especially if I'm doing any sort of thrusting action. When I was doing this, I didn't know where my blade was. I just didn't know where the tip of it was. When I would do overswings, I know kind of where that is. The problem is, with my peripheral vision, I'm usually very alert of where my blade is, right? You don't have to look directly at it. The issue was, it just disappeared. All I saw was fire, and because this is so floppy, that means my margin of error is that large.
That's fair, and that's actually something that we should mention. Now, I know you've said you put an edge on, and we're going to be doing cutting next, which will be interesting. But having a blade, a normal blade, not a magical blade, a normal blade like this, covered in fire, makes it ruin its temper. So not only is it getting softer and floppier, but it's losing its edge.
This is one of those things where that is true. That is factually correct. However,
it won't happen in a second.
That's what I mean. However, in a lot of testing that we've done, because it's not the first time we've done fire swords, and we've done it for prolonged periods of time, it still holds up. It's ruined in terms of, like, if I thrusted this and it bent, it would just stay bent.
Yes,
but
and that's the thing. It's no longer, so like something like this, well, this is a very stiff sword.
Yes.
But something like this is nice and flexible. If you started to bend that, all of that stiffness is now gone.
Yes.
It's just a softer steel.
All right, I think we can, that's as good as we're going to get for that. And I don't want to do any more just because that was a bit interesting there.
That's fair.
Let's move on to some cutting. I want to do some cutting with it. We've got the sword lit. Let's try and do some cuts. Now, this is already still hot from all the other cuts that we've done. Let's just get that off fire. All right. That kept lighting my finger on fire, and that was very hot. That's why I had to keep stopping. Bloody hell. Okay, just for completion, I want to see if this actually just cuts through. I mean, kind of.
So, is that a splitter cut? That's kind of a cut.
Okay, all right. Do you reckon we can get one more out of it? We've still got that heat on there, so it's still very hot. Let's try another cut. Let's see if I can trash. That was trash. All right, so I'm gonna stand a little bit like this. Let me just, okay, that started to defrost it. Damn. And that's just the bevel, remember? I'll do a cross. Making bacon, boys. Yes, this is literally frozen.
Well, it was.
It was. Well, it is.
It's still frozen. It's just a little defrosted on the outside, but that's kind of impressive.
You hear that? 2 inches deep on frozen pork, no edge, just the bevel, and we can even see the black scarring from where it's cooking the meat.
I mean, on the plus side, if you're actually attacked by this and you happen to not see it coming, you get hit, the wound's partially cauterized?
Partially. This is not cauterized, this is singed. It's just lightly singed.
You wouldn't want to eat this.
You would not want to eat this. Oh, and when I do the sawing motion,
oh, that's just black
ooze.
It looks magical.
But look at that gash. That's what she said. Okay, today's episode is a little bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
For full disclosure, we have done a fire sword before.
We have.
And the results that we got with that
were worse.
Kind of different.
Yeah. I think for some reason, maybe it was the bevel, it just seemed more effective today.
But that doesn't make sense because the last time we did this, we did it with a sharp, remember?
Yeah, we did.
And these here are the interesting one. Like the water bottles are kind of, I expected that. I have tried to use heat to get through water bottles and they just contract. The water cools it down too quickly. This though, this is interesting.
You know what it could be?
What?
It's just a random thing, but you know what it could be? It's very cold at the moment in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So this could be colder than normal and the heat is just helping to cut through. Compared to in the summer when we tried this last time, these were just very
We
floppy.
didn't do it in the summer. We did it kind of this sort of weather.
Are you sure?
Yeah, it was just after winter, getting into
Maybe I'm
spring.
wrong. Maybe I'm wrong.
But if we have a look at some of these cuts here,
I mean, that one's nice and clean.
But that's crazy because there's no singeing here. That's what fascinates me about this. We have that little bit of a tear at the end.
That's fine. And then, on a placement, that's...
Well, this is what happened when I tried to cut into it and then I just held the blade there for very briefly.
Exactly.
It turned into that, which is,
And that doesn't really count because that was you just smacking it and
yes.
it tearing itself.
That one there...
That was a place.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, that was a place,
okay.
I'm pretty sure.
All right. But then when it came to the pork, this is where it was fascinating because last time we got deep gashes, like big deep gashes, but it was a sharp sword.
Yes, and we had to kind of hold it there with a little bit of pressure.
And so, like when I look back on that, I think to myself, well, how much did the sword do versus how much did the heat do? This time, just a bevel, and the rest was that heat. It was still 2-3 inches deep.
I wouldn't want to be hit by that.
No, and that was...
I would not want to be hit by that.
It was frozen, guys.
Full disclaimer, the core was frozen. The outside was thawed a little.
It still had ice on it. I didn't thaw it. Let me put it that way, yeah. Which is still surprising because we're talking here, no edge. So that's just the bevel and just the heat. And I got that deep with it. That sounded really bad in my head. Anyways, it's just some interesting results because we have a mixed bag here. Sometimes it does well, sometimes it just didn't do that well.
I still think that a fire sword, all in all, is just not as good as a real sword. Like, you have a normal sharp sword, you don't have to worry about threading anything, you don't have to worry about trying to create fire anywhere, you don't have to worry about your hand being on fire. It has some great effects.
I can agree with that. I think some of the biggest advantages of like a fire sword is the stuff that we got to right at the start when we did a little bit of an exchange. When I couldn't see the blade. Now that's bad kind of for me, but even then, is it? Because if I was trying to kill you, not that I'm trying to kill you.
I appreciate that.
He also could have been blinded from not seeing my blade as well. So it's a two-way street here.
I still think, similar to the last video we did on this, I still think that if you take the fire sword concept and you apply it instead to a shield, I think that would be better.
Well,
I think that would be better.
If I recall correctly in Zelda, they might have fire shields, so maybe we might see that.
We should do that.
Did you see the Doom shield? The chainsaw shield?
No.
I got something to show Nate.
Oh.
Don't worry, this is like a year and a half away, but anyway. But I think that's gonna be all for today's episode. This was just a quick one. The weather was not cooperating with us today and we were running out of light. So I did want to do this one a little bit higher, kind of like Chaos Blades, but we just didn't have the time or anything really. Thanks for watching, guys. I genuinely hope you enjoyed. Thank you, Nate, for coming along again. It is always a pleasure to have you on the channel. And with that, I'll see you in another video next week. Have a good one.